Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're going behind the Iron Curtain. We'll be looking at some declassified documents from the FBI's Foreign Broadcast Information Service.
Oh, wow.
These reports, they analyze how Soviet media covered UFO sightings back in 1989.
1989.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look into a world that was, kind of teetering on the edge of huge change.
Politically, for sure.
Politically, yeah, and maybe cosmically, too.
Now that's intriguing.
Right. So imagine this. The late 1980s, the Soviet Union's in the middle of perestroika and glasnost.
Right.
Information's flowing more freely than ever before.
Huge changes.
And suddenly, everybody's talking about UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty wild juxtaposition. All this societal change, and then, boom, UFOs are front page news.
Exactly. So the big question is why? Why this sudden surge in UFO reports? Were the Soviets taking the possibility of, extraterrestrial life seriously? What did they actually find? We'll be exploring all that and more in this deep dive.
I'm hooked already.
Oh, you're going to love this. We're going to look at some pretty crazy incidents. Like, there's this mysterious object that crashes in Siberia.
It's a crash.
Yeah, a crash.
Yeah.
And then there's this pilot who might have had a UFO encounter that led to, well, his death.
Oh, wow.
And get this, they even set up a dedicated UFO research center in the USSR.
Wow, a whole research center.
Yeah, so let's dive in. Our main source here is a report from November 22, 1989. It really focuses on how the Soviet media was covering all these UFO sightings.
Okay.
And it all seems to kick off with this article in Socialist Industry on July 9th, 1989, announcing, you guessed it, that UFO research center.
Makes sense. An official announcement like that would definitely get people talking.
Oh, totally. And it did. Suddenly, every newspaper and media outlet's running stories about UFOs. Sightings are pouring in from all over the Soviet Union.
So like a chain reaction?
Yeah, exactly. Like they opened the floodgates or something.
Yeah.
And one of the most talked about incidents, it happened a year earlier in July of 1988 near this village called Dolnogorsk.
Dolnogorsk, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Witnesses there said they saw this reddish-orange ball, like a fireball, crashing into a hillside.
Oh, wow.
Pretty dramatic, right? But it gets even more interesting. They actually did a scientific investigation at the crash site.
Yeah. What did they find?
Well, hold on to your hats. They found unusual metal fragments. And get this, plasmoids.
Plasmoids. Okay, now you have to explain that one. What are plasmoids?
So, according to the report, these plasmoids, they had these, like, strange properties. Scientists couldn't explain them. It was like nothing they'd ever seen before. And one of the physicists involved, Yuri Zaitsev, he actually concluded that the crashed object, whatever it was, had to be extraterrestrial.
Wow. So right away, you've got this tension between the unexplained and science trying to make sense of it.
Exactly. And that tension, it runs through all of these reports. I mean, you've got people seeing these bizarre objects in the sky, things doing maneuvers that like defy physics. But then you've got the scientists, some of them anyway, trying to come up with earthly explanations, like maybe it was a rocket launch or some weird atmospheric thing.
It's classic, isn't it? Even when faced with something totally unknown, we try to rationalize it, fit it into our existing understanding of the world.
Absolutely. And the report, to its credit, it doesn't shy away from those different viewpoints. Like there's this one skeptic, Vysotsky. He was adamant that most of these UFO sightings were just people misinterpreting things they saw.
Interesting. So it wasn't just a case of everyone blindly believing in UFOs. There was genuine debate and skepticism.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it even more fascinating.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a UFO craze. There were people really questioning it, trying to figure out what was going on.
It adds a whole other layer to the narrative.
It really does.
So amidst all this debate and skepticism, were there any incidents that really captured the public's imagination, like, really stood out?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One that really sent chills down my spine, it's detailed in Socialist Industry, involves two Soviet pilots. They're up in the air,
Yeah.
and they spot this massive flying disc.
A flying disc, that's like textbook UFO imagery.
Right. And tragically, one of the pilots, while he's trying to get a closer look at this thing, he becomes disoriented.
Oh, no.
Yeah. His co-pilot had to take over the controls. And the pilot, he ended up dying shortly after. His health just suddenly deteriorated.
That's awful. But was his death definitively linked to the UFO encounter?
That's the thing. The report doesn't say. It's totally ambiguous.
So, of course, that just adds to the mystery.
Right.
Did the pilot experience some sort of, physiological or psychological effect from the sighting? It's a chilling thought.
It really is.
Uh,
And it raises questions about just how dangerous these encounters could be. We're not just talking about physical harm here, but also the potential mental and emotional impact.
right. It really underscores the potential impact of these sightings on people on a very human level.
Exactly. And keep in mind, all of this is happening while Soviet society is in this massive state of flux, you know. People are dealing with so much uncertainty about the future, about their lives. It makes you wonder how these encounters with the unexplained might have played into all that.
It's a really compelling point. Like, these sightings might have tapped into a deeper sense of unease or even a yearning for something beyond the everyday reality.
I think you're right. It's like this perfect storm of, political change, social anxieties, scientific curiosity, and then these unexplainable things happening in the sky.
The perfect recipe for a UFO frenzy.
Right. And speaking of frenzy, there was one city in particular that became like a hotspot for UFO sightings.
Oh, which one?
Voronezh.
Voronezh. What happened there?
Well, according to the reports, Voronezh had a waves of UFO sightings in the late 80s. So many that it turned into this, like, pilgrimage site for UFO enthusiasts. Even Literaturnaya Gazeta mentioned it. They said there was weighty evidence of extraterrestrial visits to the city.
Weighty evidence. That's pretty vague. Did they elaborate on what this evidence was?
Sadly, no. The report doesn't go into specifics.
So was Voronezh like the Soviet Roswell? We've got to dig into that.
We definitely do. But first, let's take a closer look at some of the specific sightings that really captivated the Soviet public.
All right, so let's get into some of these sightings. One that really jumped out at me was from Stritelnaya Gazeta on September 16th. A group of scientists, including a physicist named Elvis Kurchenko, they reported seeing a UFO.
Okay, scientists right off the bat. That adds some weight to it. What exactly did they see?
Well, they described this large luminous object. It was moving erratically, like changing directions suddenly and even hovering at times.
So it's pretty typical so far.
Yeah, but here's where it gets interesting. The report says this object left physical traces behind, scorched earth and depressions in the soil.
Well, hold on. That's not typical at all. Scorched earth. That suggests something tangible, something actually interacted with the environment.
Exactly. It's not just lights in the sky anymore. And this idea of objects defying the laws of physics, it pops up again and again in these reports. For example, Socialisticheskaya Industria on September 25th describes two Soviet aircraft. They encountered this large flying disc.
A flying disc. Classic.
Right, and it gets better. This disc, it was emitting 5 beams of light.
5 beams. Wow. Okay, that's straight out of a sci-fi movie. Did they try to, engage with it?
Yeah, they tried to approach it, but the object, it just shot straight up into the sky and vanished.
Just like that.
Gone. And this kind of incredible speed and maneuverability, it's a common thread in a lot of these reports. These things were moving in ways that no known aircraft could.
I can see why people were freaking out. It's like, what else could it be but aliens with super advanced tech, right?
Right. And it wasn't always just distant observations either. Remember that pilot we talked about earlier, the one who tragically died after his encounter?
Yeah, that was a chilling story.
Well, according to Socialisticheskaya Industria, that pilot, he became so fixated on this UFO that he actually lost control of his plane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, his co-pilot had to take over. And while officially they never said the encounter caused his death, there was a lot of talk about, what if these UFOs could actually affect people physically or even mentally?
Yeah, I can see how that would add to the fear. Like, not only are these things unexplained, but they might be dangerous too.
Right. And the report actually highlights this whole psychological impact of UFO sightings. They say how witnesses were often overwhelmed with emotion, fear, confusion, even a sense of awe.
I mean, wouldn't you be? Imagine seeing something so bizarre, so completely outside your understanding of the world.
Exactly. And then you layer on top of that all the social and cultural changes happening in the Soviet Union at the time. People were already on edge, uncertain about the future. So these UFO sightings, they probably tapped into something deeper,
Like a collective anxiety or fascination with the unknown.
Yeah.
Did these sightings, did they lead to more scientific investigation?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Komsomolskaya Pravda, on October 12th, they reported on groups of scientists going to areas where UFOs had been seen. Clearly, the scientific community was starting to take notice.
Makes sense. They couldn't just ignore all these reports. Right?
Well, and it wasn't just observation either. TASS reported on October 9th that some Soviet institutions had started offering courses on how to use the equipment needed to investigate UFO sightings. Like, they were taking it seriously.
Wow. So you've got scientists, pilots, everyday people, all reporting these strange things in the sky. It's like the whole country was looking up, waiting for the next UFO to appear. Did all these reports create any, problems?
Well, Krasnaya Zvezda on October 13th, they actually suggested that maybe some of the sightings were due to mass hysteria. I mean, there were so many reports coming in, it's not surprising that some people might have gotten caught up in it all.
So even with all this excitement, there were still voices of reason trying to find a more, I guess, down-to-earth explanation.
Right. And that's important to note. The report doesn't just say that all these sightings were misidentifications or hysteria. They acknowledge that some of them might be genuine anomalies, things we just don't understand yet.
It's that balance that I find so fascinating. They weren't just shutting down the conversation, they were trying to approach it with an open mind.
Exactly. Now, remember Voronezh, that city that seemed to be a magnet for UFOs?
Oh yeah, Soviet Roswell.
Well, Sovetskaya Russia, on October 21st, they published an article about all the sightings there.
Wasn't there a school principal, Valery Loganov, who saw something?
Yes. Loganov, he said he saw this strange object hovering over a sports field near his school. It stayed there for like 5 minutes. He described its shape, how slowly it was moving, and that it made no noise at all.
That's pretty detailed. And coming from a school principal, it's hard to just dismiss it.
Right. And Sovetskaya Russia also reported another sighting in Voronezh that same day. This time, it was a group of residents. They saw this bright, oval-shaped object flying right over their heads. They even said it was so close they could feel heat coming off it.
Wow, that's intense. These close encounters with multiple witnesses, they really make those Voronezh sightings stand out. It feels like something significant was happening there.
It really does. These weren't just quick glimpses. These were up-close personal experiences. They left a mark on the people who saw them.
So what about the new UFO Research Center? Did they investigate these Voronezh incidents?
They did. According to Sovetskaya Kultura, on October 28th, the center was looking into all these reports. They brought in scientists from different fields to try and make sense of it all.
It's amazing. You've got scientists, pilots, everyday citizens, all reporting these strange things happening in the Soviet Union. It's like a snapshot of this moment in time when the line between, reality and the unexplained just blurred.
Yeah.
But what about the government? What was their official stance on all of this? Were they trying to, control the narrative or downplay what was happening?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's what we'll dig into next.
It's like we've got all these pieces of a puzzle, but no picture on the box to guide us. We've got the sightings, the reactions, the investigations. But what about the Soviet government themselves? Were they trying to keep a lid on this whole thing?
It's a good question. And the report, it does offer some clues. Socialisticheskaya Industria on November 23rd, they ran an article about this physicist, Yuri Zaitsev. Remember him? He thought he'd found pieces of a UFO that crashed in Dolnogorsk.
Yeah, the plasmoids guy.
Right, exactly. So for them to publish that, it suggests they were at least open to the idea of UFOs, even if they weren't, shouting it from the rooftops.
True. But we also saw how some scientists were skeptical. Like Vysotsky. He blamed most of those sightings on mistaken rocket launches. Did the Soviets try to, bring those different sides together?
Seems like it. The report mentions a conference on October 28th, reported by Sovetskaya Kultura, where they brought in scientists from all sorts of fields to talk about these UFO sightings. They wanted to look at it from every angle, scientific, technological, the whole 9 yards.
So they were trying to understand it, not just sweep it under the rug. Pretty progressive for a government that was usually so secretive, right?
Yeah, it definitely fits with the whole perestroika and glasnost vibe. Maybe that openness, it extended to things like UFOs, too.
Interesting thought. I wonder how those Soviet leaders really felt about it all. Did they see it as a threat? Oh no, aliens are invading. Or maybe just a fascinating mystery.
Hard to say for sure. The report doesn't spill all the beans, but what it does give us is this amazing look at a society going through some major changes, lots of uncertainty in the air, and these UFO sightings, real or not, they became this big part of their world, sparking debates and making people question everything.
And isn't that the most interesting part? Maybe the lack of a clear answer from the government just fueled the whole thing, made it even more captivating.
It's possible. Sometimes not knowing is more intriguing than any explanation. It lets people fill in the gaps with their own ideas.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the nitty-gritty of those sightings to the bigger picture of Soviet life back then. What really stands out to you from all of this?
I think it's how all these different threads came together at this specific moment in time. A society changing rapidly, these weird events happening in the sky, and a government that was, surprisingly open to exploring it all. It's a reminder that history throws us curveballs sometimes, and our understanding of the world is always evolving.
Totally. And for everyone listening, I think the takeaway here is even in times of chaos and uncertainty, there's always room for wonder, for exploring the unknown. These Soviet UFO sightings, whether they were aliens or something else entirely, they captured a nation's imagination and forced them to confront the limits of what they knew.
Maybe that's the real legacy of those reports. A reminder to stay curious, to question everything, and to embrace the fact that there's still so much out there that we just don't understand.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. And to our listeners, keep looking up and never stop asking questions.